Hello, everyone. Yet once again, it's another day of fresh grace and mercy. This is the Guilt, Grace, Gratitude podcast, where we bridge the gap to Reformed Christian theology for your listening pleasure. Today's book club episode is brought to us by Brazos Press. Today's guest and author of today's book is Nijay Gupta, and he wrote the new book, Strange Religion: How the First Christians Were Weird, Dangerous, and Compelling. It's a fascinating book. We love it. We love talking about early church stuff. So we really enjoyed this book. You guys are going to love this conversation. If you guys go to our show notes, there's a link to Brazos Press. It takes you right to this book. So you don't have to like put the name of the book in the search bar or anything. It goes right to it. So you can just click order and buy the book for yourself or somebody you know. There's also some links to find a Reformed confessional church near your area. If you're not already going to a church, you're not a member of a church, and you want to find a Reformed Christian church, there's a link at local church finder. You can find one of the Nate Park churches, URC, OPC. OPC is what Peter and I are a part of. And then there's PCA. There's a lot of other Reformed denominations out there. And then also just reminders of how to connect with our show. If you're new to us, these conversations are automatically uploaded on YouTube. So yes, these are videos you can watch as well. The conversation, subscribe to us on YouTube. It's a growing channel. You can email us. You can find our email address there. You can find out ways to connect with us on social media as well. And so, yeah, I'm going to read the guests we've had on our show before. Michael F. Bird. He's been on our show before, and he wrote an endorsement for Nijay's book here. So he says, a terrific resource for anyone wanting to enter the world of the first Christians and understand how Christians were once loathed for practicing a rogue religion. So that's an endorsement from Michael Bird. And so, yeah, let's jump into this conversation and let Peter further introduce our guest today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce to our audience somebody who I've wanted to have on for quite a bit of time. So I'm super excited to have him on now. Nijay Gupta, like Nick said, who's professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary in Illinois, co-host of the Slow Theology podcast. So we're a fast theology podcast. If you want a slow theology podcast, I'm just kidding. The founder of the Crux Sola blog, and has written numerous books, including Tell Her Story, which is fantastic. A Beginner's Guide to the New Testament Studies, 15 New Testament Words for Life, or of Life, and commentaries on Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And I think he edits a couple series as well, too, and a new editing one for Zondervan as well. He's also the co-editor with Scot McKnight of the State of New Testament Studies and a senior translator for the New Living Translation. And Gupta lives in Portland, Oregon. So I don't know how he finds time to breathe or do fun things, but it's a pleasure having you on the show, Dr. Gupta.
Thanks, guys. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
This will be fun. So I asked the same question yesterday. So recorded yesterday, published different time than yours will be published. But we talked to Jessica Hooten-Wilson, and I asked her the same question. I'm going to ask you. What is a Gupta favorite Christmas tradition? What do you got to do each year to yeah, it's Christmas time?
Oh boy. Okay. We'll do one more series. We'll do one serious one. First we'll do one more kind of whimsical. So Sufjan Stevens, I break out the Sufjan.
Oh yeah.
Sufjan Christmas, and my family hates it.
Really?
They kind of hate it. I think they find the music a little obnoxious. Okay. But if I'm in my office, I'm gonna pump some Sufjan, and I don't know. It kind of makes me feel cozy. It makes me feel Christmassy. And then there's a certain time kind of after Thanksgiving where I switch from pumpkin spicy coffee to peppermint mocha. Like that is the sign that we're going to worship the baby Jesus.
Sign of the times. There you go. Right there.
Peppermint mocha. But then a little more serious. My family lived in England for a few years when I did my PhD, and they have these things called Advent candles, which are not the Sunday ones.
Oh,
they're ones that have numbers 1 through 25 on the candle, and you burn them every day, and you burn down the day. And so it's just super fun because they're really long-lasting candles, so that you actually burn them the entire day.
Do they smell? Are they like incensey at all?
No, nope. Okay. But it's just cool to have the candle going all Advent. So that's that's one of my. It was funny. I posted about this. Then my daughter messages me on Instagram and she says, "Dad, we've literally never done this before." And I was like, "We did it back in England. You were just a baby, but
Yeah.
always count on your children to
Yeah,
humiliate
correct
you."
me. Yeah, Dad, stop being weird. This is not what we do. Cool.
Well, speaking of weird though, weird
Yeah,
Christians.
that's right. Speaking of weird, there we go. There's the transition right there. So we've had a fun question. So beyond your writing bio, your academic bio, your church bio, tell the audience a little bit more, get to know Nijay Gupta a little bit more.
Yeah, my wife Amy, she and I met in seminary, and we've moved all over the place. We lived in Boston. I grew up in Ohio. We lived in Boston for a while. We lived in England. We lived in Ohio again. We lived in Seattle. We lived in Philadelphia. We lived in New York,
Yeesh.
and now we live in Portland, Oregon. We've been.
You got to
here
hit
for...
You had to get SoCal now. You got to hit like the Southwest. You got to live here.
I know, but now I'm just too used to the cloudiness. I don't know if I can handle sunshine. But I mean, you've heard some academic things, but just to get to know me personally, I'm a big foodie.
Okay.
I love Asian food. I love some good street tacos. We had street tacos yesterday.
You definitely have to visit SoCal. Like where I live in Santa Ana, we're dead central for taco trucks.
Okay. All right, we'll make it happen. And then I love coffee. I'm a coffee snob. Yep. We have this joke kind of in Portland. The more fancy the coffee, the smaller the cup. And so eventually you're just going to have like a thimble with like vapors, coffee vapors. It's going to be like $20. And, it's funny because here, like the standard is 8 ounce, which is really small, right?
Sure.
And so it's just weird when I'm traveling elsewhere and I have to get, like a 16 ounce. And it's just this like massive,
you're like, this is a lot of coffee.
Big gulp of coffee. But I'm a big coffee fan. And I love movies and TV, which isn't technically a hobby, I don't think. But I think because we have 3 kids, we were home so much for when they were young, and you're trapped at home, so you end up watching stuff. So you'll notice a lot of my books have TV and movie illustrations. Yep. This is one of the biggest differences between my colleague Scot McKnight and I. Scott is high culture. And I am low culture, unabashedly low culture. Okay. And so everything from Harry Potter to Marvel movies and beyond, I'm a man of the people.
You're making me feel so much better about myself because I have
a theologian.
Because I have like a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I'm like lately, are we watching too much TV? Like, but it's hard.
Nick and I share the same YouTube account for the podcast, and I look at some of the stuff that he's watching, and I was like, okay. I wouldn't watch that stuff, but all right.
Dora the Explorer.
Yeah, a lot of little kid stuff. But no, I actually used to live in Seattle too, so I can echo what Peter's saying. Going from Seattle to here, the tacos are amazing down here.
Yeah, you haven't had street tacos unless you go to Santa Ana. This is the place to go.
But from the Northwest, I can also say, there's a lot of cloudy days up there. I have to ask a random question because you're in Portland.
Yeah.
Do you know of the Bible Project guys? They're there in Portland too.
Yeah, totally. So one of my doctoral students works at the Bible Project. He's the dean of research and scholarship. And so we have kind of a bit of a mutual relationship with Northern because
cool.
I'll go do like training sessions there on Bible and research, and they'll bring me in sometimes for events, and then I'll have them speak to our students about creativity and artistry and the Christian imagination. So I have nothing but respect. But what's really funny is like the different ministries we have, because Bible Project reaches literally millions upon millions of people.
Yeah, they're a big deal.
And Northern is on the opposite end where like we reach a dozen. Like, our goal is like so small. Like we want to like go deep for 3 to 5 years with pastors, and then Bible Project. But we're all part of the same mission. Pretty cool.
I mean, for God's kingdom, every individual's a big deal.
Yeah.
It means everything. One person.
I have a less serious question. Have you watched the show Portlandia, and what do you think about it?
I have. Obviously it's going to be an exaggeration. Portland is pretty weird, and I'm so used to it I don't think about it. So just either the way people dress or kind of the weird stores, like I don't think about it most of the time.
Yeah, it's just part of your culture now. It's just like what happens.
Yeah, until I'm traveling. I'll tell you one funny thing though is like I don't know how much this relates to Portlandia, but like we have a lot of sporting goods stores headquarters here, like Nike.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
Adidas
true,
is
true.
national headquarters is here.
Mhm.
Columbia, Under Armour's has a major facility here.
Is REI
And
over there
so
as well, or no?
I don't know
Seattle.
if they're
REI
yeah,
is
they're
in
not.
Seattle.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, Pacific
But
Northwest.
like everybody wears sports clothes, like everybody,
True.
including elderly people. So it's so funny, like you'll see like 75-year-olds like on a bicycle with all the gear or going walking. They don't wear old people clothes here.
Right.
Like I grew up in Ohio where like, old people clothes, right?
Yeah.
They don't wear them here. They just
Khakis.
they'll be wearing like Adidas gear or Patagonia, and it's yeah, it took some getting used to.
Did
The
you know
North
Adidas
Face.
is huh?
Yeah, the
I was
North
going to say
Face.
the North Face is a big
Yeah.
brand too.
Did you know Adidas is not actually pronounced Adidas?
Yeah,
It's
Adidas.
pronounced Adidas.
Yeah.
I
Oh.
learned that like 2 days ago. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I've been pronouncing it wrong my entire life.
Same. I think everyone has.
Yeah.
Me too.
Maybe that's just an English thing, but I noticed that myself. So on to more important questions. We can talk about Portland and weirdness and all that stuff all day long. But where did the idea for this book come from, Strange Religion? Because it does a couple of things. It combines history, sociology, theology, and kind of many more disciplines. So what are you trying to do in this book, and where did the idea come from?
Yeah, so I think of it kind of at two ends. One is sort of the modern cultural end, and one is the academic end. So we'll get the academic end in a second. But the cultural end, like the idea came kind of, combined with, what beginning with COVID, where one thing, COVID was horrible, right? But one thing that happened there is it made you wonder, what is church? You had to reimagine church. And then once COVID started to lighten up, people started to realize they could live without church. You know what I mean? You get in these routines, you go to church, and then you stop going to church, and then you wonder, why do I need to go to church? It was this big shakeup. And pastors, I think it's terrible, but it's also good to be like, what does this actually contribute to people's lives?
Yep.
And I think the general sentiment here in a very unchurched area where I live is, if you could get along without church, we're not making a good case for church.
Exactly.
If you could say like, I'm too busy for church, then we haven't really sold people on what the church is. That's number one. Is
or it's not too different
out,
than my Monday to Friday life. So like, what's the point? This is just the same thing as everything else.
And then you combine that with the rise or the re-rise of Christian nationalism, which is, for people that don't really understand what that is, it's a kind of intertwining of state identity and religion. I'm in some ways I'm not very Portland, in other ways I'm very Portland. One way I'm very Portland is I don't like for my kids to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Not because I don't love America, my parents are immigrants and all that. We could talk about that later if you want, but it's because if you're a Christian, all you need to do is pledge allegiance to Jesus, and then you're just going to be a good person. And isn't that what we really want? Right? The only reason you play, all right, we're getting off topic, but Christian nationalism is this idea that it's actually a very Roman idea of religion being tied to state.
Right.
And the dangers of that, because you start to align Jesus with red, white, and blue to the point where you actually can't tell the difference. And then everything America does is everything Jesus would do, and vice versa. And that gets us in all. So
I'm American, therefore I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian, therefore I'm American, all this stuff.
Right. And then you combine that with the church scandals, right? And the church has always had scandals, but now they're just widespread, and we know about them, on a more widespread scale. And, I don't need to tell you this, Christianity just has a very bad reputation.
It does, unfortunately,
And if I just was to, talk with someone on the street here in Portland about Christianity, their overall impression is Christians are racist, sexist, mean-spirited, fascist, jerks. I mean, you look at who the prominent Christians are in the political sphere or on social media, some of them are not good people. We just say that they're not people that we would say, I want my kids to grow up to be like that person.
Or have them over dinner one day or hang out. It's just not somebody you want to hang out with.
Yeah. And so I guess, in terms of my vocation, like I see a huge gap between what people think Christianity is when you just kind of pull people on the streets here in Portland and what I read in the Bible.
Correct.
Like what I read in the Bible, in the New Testament in particular, which is my area of study, they just don't look the same. Like, how can you connect these two groups of people? Now, my church, my community group, like great people. And my wife is like a super evangelist. She's telling people about Jesus all the time. And she's not embarrassed because she wants to help everyday people know what Christians should really be like. Like my wife was the PTA president. My wife volunteers for everything. She's the first to respond if there's need in the community. Like that's how Christians should be, right? So there's this yawning gap, right, between the reputation of Christians, generally speaking, in the United States, and what it could have been or should have been based on how the early Christians behaved. So I use an analogy in the book, and I'm curious what you guys think about this. But
I know exactly which one. I know which one you're about to say.
The hardest thing to write in a book for me is the introduction, because you want it to be really, really good.
Yeah.
So I didn't write the introduction till the very, very end. And actually, my publisher was like, we thought you were going to do more application in this book. It's more of a history book. So you need to grab the reader. So it took some time for me to figure out what I want to say, but finally I came up with it. So here it is. So I love hippie Portland stuff. And one of the hippiest Portland things is coconut water.
This is a brilliant illustration, by the way. It is brilliant.
The first time I had coconut water was actually in Philadelphia. I got it from a gas station because I just want to try something different. And it was this, liquid that's clear, the way you would imagine coconut water is. It's water. And you drink it, whatever. And then fast forward to when I'm in Portland and I go to Costco and there's a huge pack of coconut water. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to try it, get this Costco discount pack. And I walk up closer and it's pink. And I'm thinking to myself,
hold up.
Shouldn't coconut water be clear because it's water? It's coming from a coconut, should be fresh. So I'm thinking there's something really wrong with this pack of coconut water. So I go to the next pack and it's also pink. And then the whole aisle is pink coconut water. I'm thinking, what kind of weird, like, is this
what weird hippie water is this stuff?
Yeah. And then I look closer and actually on the package it says, real coconut water is pink. And so then you read this little description and it says, once you open up a coconut, yes, there's water in it, but once it touches oxygen, it gets oxygenated.
Oxygenates, whatever the word is.
Yeah, it turns pink. So it actually should be pink.
Yeah.
It's not pink right away, like right when you open it, but if it's been out in the air for an hour or two, it's going to turn pink. It's totally natural, tastes totally fine. I buy it all the time, tastes normal. So then why have I seen clear coconut water? Because some companies think that you want clear coconut water, so they actually chemically alter it to make it clear, because we associate clear with refreshing and pristine. So they actually change it from natural to unnatural to make it appear more natural.
Exactly. Yep.
And I thought to myself, this is kind of a good analogy for how we have changed Christianity to make it more palatable to people.
Yep.
And we say, we'll just adapt Christianity what you want. You want a mean Christianity? We'll give you mean Christianity. You want a racist Christian? We'll give you a racist Christian. Anything you want. Come to the store.
You want consumer Christianity? We'll give you consumer Christianity. Whatever it is.
We'll give it to you. And, in many ways, we've forgotten our roots. And one of the things that inspired me is I came across this quote from a book from Miroslav Volf, who's a great theologian. He's actually quoting the ancient critic of Christianity, Celsus.
Yep.
And he says this, so I got to read it for the book here. Celsus said, if all men wanted to be Christians, the Christians would no longer want them. What that means is Christians were so weird. They just seemed to be weird on purpose. I think he's wrong. I don't think they were trying to be weird on purpose. But the whole point is they always lived an opposite day. Meaning you go right, they go left. You go up, they go down. They weren't trying to do that, but simply following Jesus led them to an upside down kingdom. And like them or not, they were clearly different.
Yeah.
Like them or not. And there were a lot of people that didn't like them.
Yeah.
They were clearly different.
Yeah.
And I think the dangers of Christianity today is we've lost the gospel weirdness. People have, as I've presented this about this book to people, they've said weird isn't always good. What if you're just mean, horrible, whatever? So it's gospel weirdness. I feel like in many ways we've lost gospel weirdness, or the better way to say is this book is an invitation to better know our spiritual ancestors so we can remember who we once were, so that we can say to the world, hey, we have this great solution and we're not like everybody else. And that's actually the point. That's the pitch.
Yep. No, I thought your illustration, the coconut water thing, was perfect because, yeah, you've been sold kind of a bill of goods and you get to the real bill of goods and you're like, hey, wait a second, that's not what I think this is. And you're like, oh, wait, it's because that's actually the right way of doing this. And everything else that's been sold before has been them masquerading as the right way of doing this.
And I got to brag on the cover a little bit because I really gave my publisher a lot of instruction on what I wanted. So tell me if they captured it. I wanted ancient, I wanted Jesus, and I wanted weird.
It catches all three.
I think they got it.
It does. Yeah.
Well, and like a couple things of what you're saying too. That's why I think seeker-friendly churches can be. There's a slippery slope there where they're watering down the gospel to make sure culture can come into the church, where we're, we got to stand to what our biblical roots are. The church is weird and different from culture, and that's where it's welcoming from people to come in instead of
because it would both be like secret sensitive, but also be those who are like, oh, we're Republicans, oh, we're Democrats, we're gonna like push this into the system. And it's like, if you're with us, then you're with us. If you're against us, then you're against us. Versus, okay, we're going to be biblical Christians that transcend some of these boundaries. And this is, if you like us, you like us. If you don't, you don't. But it's not because of our affiliations, because who we are in Jesus.
Yeah. The Apostle Paul does a good job in 1 Corinthians of actually giving us a model of seeker-friendly, because he basically says these are these people. He actually calls them idiotes, which isn't an insult. It's not idiot, but it literally means someone without a community, someone independent from your community. But they're there, right? They're idiotes, they're idioti, they're there. And what he says is, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, what happens in a church should be explained to them. They need, and they need to feel like they can be a part of it without being a part of it. Right, those are the fundamentals. It has to be understandable, like, but you could still be weird. Like if you run around, waving banners and flags, like do it. Like if interpretive dance, like just do whatever. That's fine. Be weird, but they should be able to understand what it is. I went to a Pentecostal church long time ago, like 25 years ago. And it's funny, they do like laughing in the spirit and slaying the spirit. And there's this big church and they had pamphlets in the seats with illustrations that explain what everything is. I just love that. It was like stickmen. I just love they're explaining like what's slain in the spirit. I don't necessarily buy into all of it or understand all of it, but I love that they wanted to explain it all. So I think seeker friendly, I think should mean make it accessible from an understanding standpoint. Right. But don't be afraid to be everything a Christian is.
You're totally right. Exactly.
Right. Don't water it down. Like people hopefully go to church because there's something they need.
They're looking for something different. They're
don't be afraid to meet that
everyday life.
And also this ties into my question too. It's something you said earlier that's important too to highlight is the importance of evangelism is I mean, it's important everywhere, obviously, for God's kingdom all in every nation. But like Portland's such a great example. It's a very de-churched city. A lot of people have a lot of mischaracterizations, a lot of misunderstandings about Christianity and lies from the enemy about Christianity. And a lot of what they understand are not true representations of Christianity. So like, God bless you, your ministry, and your wife, and people like at Bible Project, they're in that community that are explaining true biblical Christianity that to people on the streets of places like Portland. It's so important. So so speaking of people on the streets, like going out, and so if you're now talking to a Christian on the street, and knowing Christianity is still the largest religion. If you ask the average Christian on the street, is Christianity strange? Is it actually a really strange religion, you probably would get a puzzled look. They probably never considered that question before or thought about it. Like, is my religion strange? Because especially living in, even if in post-Christian America, in America, even in places like Portland, it's still looked at as kind of a common thing, common religion. So it's not looked at as totally weird or strange, but it is strange. So big picture, going back to 2000 years ago, in the Greco-Roman culture world, it was very weird and strange. So what are some of the ways that Christianity was so strange 2000 years ago in that area?
Yeah, and this is, where once I started to dig in, when you propose a book to a publisher, you haven't written it yet, so it's kind of a guess, right? You're kind of like, I think I got something here. I think I got an idea. And then you start digging, and either you find gold or you don't. And I mean, I found way more than I ever thought I would in terms of just how, weird. We think of weird as like uncomfortable or whatever, but technically weird means deviant from the norm, right? They don't fit in. Yeah, absolutely. And man, Christians were as opposite of what religion was at the time as you could get. And I used Roman religion as the framework, which would have been the state religion.
Yep.
We're talking like Jupiter and Neptune and all of that, what we think of as Zeus and Poseidon, all those gods. And, if you were to just write down the fundamentals of religion in the Roman world before Christianity, it would be temple, cult statues, priests, and sacrifices. Like those were the building blocks. And Christians had none of them. Think about that. They didn't have a temple. I mean, they had the Jewish temple, but that got destroyed pretty, within a generation.
Yep.
They didn't have cult statues, meaning in the ancient world, to worship was to worship with a statue. Right? And Jews didn't have that, but they did have a temple, and that was a big deal. Christians didn't have priests. Like this was the fundamental personnel of religion. And maybe the biggest one, sacrifices. Like in the Roman religion, it wasn't an atonement sacrifice, but it was kind of, I call it like the quarter in the payphone to make a phone call. And sacrifice was the way you engage communicating with the gods.
Calling out for help or something pleasing, or like, hey, pay attention to me.
Yeah, like it was so normal, like paying your taxes or paying for gas. Like, we got an electric car a couple years ago, and this weird experience of like not going to the gas station. Like it's weird because you spend literally every other week going to the gas station for 20, 30 years.
Yep.
Right. And then you just stop going to the gas station. And it's like, so here the Christians were. So imagine if I came to you and I said, I have an idea for school, a new school, but we're not gonna have a building, teachers, classrooms, or students.
You're like, what are you gonna do?
What is it? Like, what actually is it? Yeah, and that's kind of what the Christians were doing. They were completely rewriting the script of what a religion is. Now, I don't know if we're going too much in the weeds here, but I'm trying to synthesize. I kind of did this morning. If you were to compare the way Romans looked at religion to the way the Christians did, and I have to synthesize a lot here.
Sure.
I think Romans would focus on four things: power, fear, hierarchy, and conquest. The Roman way of thinking about religion: power.
Are you sure you're not describing America?
A lot of American stuff is actually draws back to Roman foundations. So power. So this idea that the world is created according to a certain structure, a hierarchical structure like a pyramid, and at the top are a few, like the gods, like Jupiter, right? And then you go down, and then you have demigods, you have the emperor, and then you have humans, you have senators, people elite class, then you have commoners, then at the bottom you have the biggest group, which are slaves, criminals, and immigrants, right? That's in the bottom. So you have a power pyramid, right? All of society, and the gods are up here. Power, fear, we have to keep people in check, right? People need to know where they fit in, and we keep people in check, right? In hierarchy. And then conquest, our goal is to keep expanding. Rome really wanted to take over as many nations as they could. And they had this ritual. This is really interesting. And I talk about this in the book. They have this ritual called evocatio, where if I'm Rome and I'm going to a foreign city to conquer it, the first thing I do is I ride up to a hill near to the city, and I call out to the patron god of the city. And let's say it's Apollos of Tyre. So if we say, Apollos of Tyre, I am so-and-so of Rome, and I'm going to siege this city. I'm going to destroy it, wipe it out, take the people as slaves. But I'm giving you a chance. So he's talking to a god. I'm giving you a chance to come to the Roman side now, before the shame of conquest, and join our pantheon. And we'll give you a nice seat at the table. You won't be at the top, but you'll have a nice seat. And you can do that now before we destroy the city, and you won't experience any shame. Like, you've joined our team. And this was extremely common. And we have actually stories of cities knowing they were going to get sieged, where they would actually tie down the statues with chains because they were afraid the statue would actually fly away.
Wow.
They were afraid it would fly away, or it would disappear, or would walk away, or whatever. And so that's this conquest notion, like, we're going to keep expanding by power. Now compare that to the Christians. I've had to write this out and think about it. If the Roman idea of the gods was one of government, the gods are magistrates, the god are lords of power. You know, we watched Hamilton the musical sometimes. I think of the image of the king, you know,
brilliantly done.
You,
yep.
But I love you with power, right?
Brilliantly
I'll
done.
kill all your friends and family. You know what I mean? Like, and then he wants
to remind you
like,
of my love. Yeah.
To remind you, this is extremely Roman stuff.
Yeah.
Right? This is really Roman stuff. So that's the conception of power. And for Christians, so I'm trying to parallel them here. Instead of power, it's family. Right? One of the most popular terms within Christianity was beloved, agapetos, beloved. Number 2, instead of fear, love. One of the reasons I wrote this book is just an insight from Larry Hurtado, early Christian scholar who's passed away, who says love language is almost entirely absent from ancient religious literature, except Judaism and Christianity. And number 3, instead of hierarchy, cruciformity, the way of the cross, mutuality, humility, and equality. And you'll notice that I have a chapter in here called "The People Who Worship in Houses" or something like that. That's a parallel to "The People Who Stare at Goats," by the way, another social media, or it's another low culture reference. But the whole idea that churches meet in homes, I lament that we've gotten away from that. And I know it's not possible in big churches and whatever, but the home wasn't just a convenient location. It said something culturally about what Christianity is, which is a family of people that love one another. The fact they met in homes with a meal, they call each other brother and sister, they have a kiss of affection, signals embrace. So if I had to, so that's the opposite of conquest. Conquest is, I'll kill all your friends and family, right? To remind you of my love. The Christians, the opposite is embrace, right? You have a home with us. You have a safe place with us, and you can be yourself. How powerful is that? So family, love, cruciformity, embrace, and the home context. I mean, that'll preach, right, guys?
That's pretty good stuff. Yeah, and that's
like it.
Yeah, people can read the book, and I love that Larry Hurtado reference too, because he does a lot on early Christianity and early Christology stuff. And so getting even further into Greco-Roman society, like you said, it was religious, but it's not religious when we think of kind of in modern day, for religions and traditions and cults. And they, like you said in the book, not necessarily embrace other religions, but like, yeah, you can worship how you want to, as long as you kind of don't mess with our system. As long as you allow emperor worship, you still call Caesar Lord, you can do kind of whatever you wanted. But this does not do the same thing with Christianity. So why would this have been so strange at the time? How would Christians have been viewed by Greco-Roman society, Romans and whatnot, where they don't bend the knee to Caesar? They don't call him Lord. They call Jesus Lord and him Lord alone. So how does that go down in Roman society when they like say, yeah, other religions, yeah, as long as you don't mess with our system, you're good?
Yeah. This is a great question. And I was just fascinated by how this works, because there is a kind of complex dynamic at work. So you had the state religion. Everybody had to honor the emperor. Everybody had to honor Jupiter and Roma, which was the goddess of the spirit of Rome. So, think about if we had a patron deity of New York or Washington, D.C., right? And that's what they had. So you had to do that.
Mhm.
But if you wanted to worship, Isis, which was an Egyptian god, fine, you can do that. If you wanted to worship, certain Sibylline gods, Eastern gods, you could do that. Or if you're Jewish, you want to worship the God of Israel, you could do that. But it has to be Romanized.
Yeah.
It has to be compatible with Roman religion, right? And what's fascinating is there was a tolerance policy, broad tolerance, but there also had to be regulation. And there's messiness to that. And the example I can think of is like, we have the Statue of Liberty, which is like, send all of your poor, your whatever outcast, and we'll take them in. And then we also have border regulations. So there's this kind of spirit of openness, which is true. My parents came as immigrants, but then there's also regulation. And so I actually have a handy dandy chart in my book.
That's right. There's a lot more charts in this book than I thought there, and more pictures.
Yeah,
If people like pictures and charts, you're gonna like this book.
So here's a little chart here, and one thing that, generally speaking, Romans differentiated was something called religio, and then superstitio. So religio is the idea of safe, good Roman or Romanized religion, and superstitio was dangerous, threatening, and non-Roman Romanized religion. And you actually had people that were kind of policing this. And so, for example, one of the reasons Socrates was killed, now this is the Greek era, one of the reasons Socrates was killed is because people accused him of introducing in a dangerous way foreign gods. But so I give kind of some differences. So good religio in Roman thought was ancient, meaning that the religion was very, very old, and therefore it has a track record of being helpful. Like the older the god, the better they are on our team. Right? If you're recruiting for a sports team, you're thinking, okay,
yeah, I can rely on this guy.
The more they have stats that we can that we can work with. Ritualized, meaning there are clear rules to their religion. Corporate, meaning it's a group of people, so they'll keep each other in check. And effective, meaning you worship and then there's blessing. Right? There's a clear. Now, superstitio, this was dangerous or volatile religion, was innovative, like, hey, I got a new idea, like that was bad at the time. New ideas were bad. Ecstatic, meaning spontaneous, spirit-led, all of that. So think about Christians here. Individualized, religion of the heart, right? Things like that would be bad because it's too, it lacks control. It's unwieldy.
I can't track this. I can't find this. Nothing like that.
And then desperate. So this is interesting. There's one ancient writer that said kind of the opposite of what we think. This was Plutarch. He said, those Jews, they spend too much time in the temple. He's like, if you really trust your God, you just show up, do your sacrifice, and leave. The fact you spend so much time in your temple.
What are they doing in there?
They're desperate, right? They don't trust their God, so they have to be pleading all the time. He misunderstands them. But this is a very Romanized way of thinking that it's like your banker. It's like the relationship with your bank, right? I love my bank, right? I depend on them, but I try to go there as infrequently as possible.
For as short a time as possible when I'm in there.
Right. And I'm polite. Like if I want a loan, like I'm polite, shake your hand, but I'm not going to hug them. I'm not going to kiss them. Right. We're not going to have dinner together. Right. So it's this idea of polite distance. And so a religion could be assimilated if it maintains these features of religio. And the idea of can it fit into these elements of power, hierarchy, fear, and conquest? If you can get it in there, sure, the more the merrier. But if you can't, then this is a threat.
That's a danger. Yep.
And so now you got Christianity coming, and they're a brand new religion, right? It's this Jesus person. We know his birthday, like he's he's in living memory.
Yeah, he's not that old. Yeah,
we got spirit empowerment, and we got Pentecost. We got people healing. You got sidewalk baptisms. I mean, you got all this stuff, and then they're anti-conquest, and they're talking about love. They're hippy dippy. They're kissing each other. and then real religious people meet in temples and in open spaces, And these Christians are meeting secretly at night in homes, and they're having meals. And this seems like a cult, right? What we think of as a cult is what the way. So an interesting example here, and I have a picture of this in the book, is one of the earliest images of Christianity visually that we have is something called the Alexamenos graffito.
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually like a scratching on stone, and we're able to kind of make a picture out of it. And it's a person on a cross with the head of a donkey, and there's a human next to that cross.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen that.
Seems to be looking at the person, and it says, and there's like a caption. It looks like almost like a teenager's handwriting. Alexamenos worships his God. And it seems like this is a reference to Jesus on the cross with a donkey head, probably meaning something like worshiping Jesus is like worshiping a donkey. It's stupid.
Yep.
And this appears to be a non-Christian making fun of Christians. This is something from perhaps the early 2nd century, very, very early depiction of Christianity, and a mockery of the cross, and a way of saying, this is not good for Rome. This kind of religion is not good for Rome. It's not the Roman way. And we need to get these people out. Get these people out. And Christians came to actually embrace the cross as their central symbol. How did that happen? And it's hard for us to understand, because we wear crosses as jewelry and things, how countercultural this would be. Like it's a symbol of shame that the Christians adopted. This is the weirdness, right? Part of being weird is saying, I'm going to be myself, even if other people make fun of me or don't like it. Right. And you don't want to be a jerk, whatever, but it's having that sense of security in your identity. Like, I'm going to dress weird. I'm going to wear this thing, or I'm going to get this tattoo, or whatever it is. Right. That's where you have that sense of security. And for Christians, it was saying, we're going to hang to the cross, because the cross doesn't just happen to be the place where Jesus died. It's actually a symbol of his humility, his obedience to God, and his love for the world. And that's a very non-Roman thing. That's the least Roman thing you could think of.
Yeah,
a humble, meek God versus, or not, they would have kind of bifurcated this: humble, meek God, and a strong, powerful, I'm going to take you down God. They just saw a difference. Like, how can you possibly worship a humble God?
Yeah, I spent a couple of years just studying Greco-Roman religion, specifically Roman religion. And I read everything I could read, secondary literature, primary literature. I read everything I could. I'm not an expert, but I spent a lot of time in it. And at the end of all that, one thing really stuck with me. There are patron gods for everything. Like, there are patron gods for the flu, for, baking, for your household pantry. Like, there's gods for everything. But there's one thing that the Romans didn't have. They didn't have a patron god of the weak. Now, they have patron gods of healing, for sure, like Asclepius. They have all kinds of gods of healing. But they had no god of the weak, because no respectable god would identify with the weak. And yet, when you read the New Testament, this is one of the most noticeable things, especially in the Gospels, that Jesus identifies with the weak, and he himself in the incarnation becomes weak. Right? I mean, it's incredible. I mean, read Hebrews, read 2 Corinthians.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, that helps peel back the onion on this interesting question and stuff, because we got to see it makes sense why God had the second person of the Trinity, his Word, the Son, incarnate at this time in history. Because in this Greco-Roman contextual world, it's even more highlighted that this pagan culture that worships these gods that it's all about military conquest, strength, power in human terms, where humans are constructing their version of God, where God's like, nope, I'm going to totally flip this on its head. I'm going to show the need for humility. And yes, it caused a mockery and persecution, because it was so confusing and weird. Like you said, like this Rome looked at it as like, oh, this was your God? Well, we killed him on the cross. Now what? Now what are you going to do? This is Rome. You can't destroy us. And 2,000 years later, now we look back and it's like, well, Rome's been gone for a while, but this human heart of pride of making up these false gods has not gone away. Rome has not gone away in the hearts. But
that's right.
Christianity is God's kingdom, and it's eternal. And so God will throw down man-made kingdoms, but his kingdom will never end. And he, in a way, mocks the man-made kingdom with his with Christ coming. So we look at, so you're taking us back. I love this because it's a historical conversation. You're taking us back to the early Christian church 2,000 years ago in this place and time. Now, these Greco-Roman cultural, well, humans have always been really religious. I mean, we're built since before the fall to be religious. Because of the fall, we're corrupt now. We worship wrong things. So Roman Greece were no different. The Greco-Roman world had festivals, parties. They were worshiping their pagan gods. You were going really well into that, introducing what some of them were their favorite gods, and they were just deeply enmeshed in Greek and Roman worship and hero worship. So now a little bit more perspective too from a obviously non-Christian, because Christianity further developed from Judaism. So these people back then, these non-Christian Greco-Romans, they knew about Judaism. They've heard about this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But now they're like, there's it's branched into as of Jesus Christ. He just finished his ministry. And so from the perspective of these Greco-Roman pagans, how did they mock and persecute us in the early Christian church?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just deviating from the fundamentals of what we said. These people didn't have kind of the infrastructure. But, I think they also just would say that they aren't going to amount to anything. I mean, Paul says in 1 Corinthians, not many of you are well-born and powerful. And what that means is that, maybe there were, a small percentage of elites, but by and large, Christianity was attractive. It's funny, when you talk about book titles, my original that I pitched was the same title, but I said weird, dangerous, and attractive. And I think attractive may have seemed like the wrong word for it. I still like it, but compelling is fine. But attractive, I think it was attractive to the least of these because they're the people without hope, right? And they're the people that are looking at the world order and saying, I don't fit into this place. I mean, just going back to my childhood, I grew up in a Hindu household. My parents are wonderful, but I was struggling to find my place in the world. And I had health problems. I just wasn't, the best at the things I was expected to be the best at. And when my brother first started taking me to church, and I did not know much about Christianity, I mean, here was a people that just accepted me as I was, right? And just said, we don't want to conform you to anything in particular from a demographic standpoint or success metrics. We just want to share the love of Jesus with you. They really, honestly, truly did just want to share the love of Jesus with me. That was it. And that sold me, right? Because I knew I wasn't ever going to be the person that I was expected to be. So one of the reasons Rome hated Christianity and perhaps underestimated it was actually the reason it became so successful is it completely took the power structures out of the way to allow individual people to have a direct relationship with God. I mean, I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but one of the questions we're going to get to is about priests. And I actually have a lot of friends who are priests, and so we get into some arguments about this.
That's
because I argue in my book that early Christians didn't have priests.
Yep.
Now, they didn't technically have priests, and I will stand by that, because no Christian leaders were actually called priest in the ways that term would have been used at the time. Now, if you want to say pastors and Christian leaders are priests,
Sure.
the sense that we have an agency ministry as leaders. Great. Yeah, totally. But in the ancient world, a priest was technically a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And, one of the questions that you're going to ask, and I'm just going to hit it now, is why Christians didn't have priests and what were they doing that was so tricky?
Yeah.
So again, I love just kind of, analogies from our everyday experiences of life. So there's a pizza place here in the West. Do you guys have Mod Pizza? I think you guys probably do.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, Mod Pizza.
So good.
Yeah. I always thought it stood for modular, but it actually stands for made on delivery, whatever. Anyway, made on demand. Yeah. But the whole idea, it's like Subway. For those people who are listening, you don't know. It's like Subway where you go in and you choose all your toppings, right? And you do that with a pizza. I love it, by the way. And so the idea I came up with to kind of as an analogy for this is, why can't you just go in and make your own pizza and put it in the brick oven? There's cross-contamination and all that, and maybe they'll come up with something where we could do that. But it's super dangerous. Like, you're going to burn yourself on that, like, 10,000 degree brick oven. So, like, you get to have some choice, but a professional is trained. I don't think, since they're teenagers, they're probably not trained that well, but a professional is trained, and they have the right equipment, and they have the right regulation to be the person to put it in the oven. Right? Or another analogy I came up with was, think about fireworks. In some states, you could just drive off the side of the road in July, buy a bunch of fireworks, and light them in your backyard and scare everybody's dog, everybody's, animals. But in some states, I think if I remember correctly, it was the state of Massachusetts, you're not allowed to buy fireworks. And they have a whole website dedicated to this because it's simply too dangerous. Now, we have fireworks displays because we love them, but you have to have trained professionals handle these very volatile things.
You've never been to Santa Ana, where fireworks go off all day long, every day, all year.
Yeah, so you got street tacos, and you have fireworks.
Fireworks all day. The joke around here, sorry to interrupt, the joke around here was that a firework or a gunshot? And you're never 100% sure. But
you're just festive people.
Yeah, we are. Like, you celebrate everything with fireworks, but it kind of goes to your point. There's always something going wrong with the fireworks here, because people should be setting off fireworks, even though
it leads to fires, and you should say like, not at this time, or people blow off their fingers and all of that. And it's the same thing with priests. Like, I think the Roman idea was, we need these gatekeepers who follow in a line of priests who know how to handle the things of God. And then for the Christians to say, actually, you could do this. And I talk about this, so I use a Stranger Things illustration here, but I talk about this thinking back to the 80s. I was watching an episode of Stranger Things, which is one of my favorite shows. And there's a scene where, a couple of people are in a building and they're running away from, the boogeyman or whatever. And I remember yelling out. I literally, it was as a night on, like a Saturday night. I was by myself and I yell out, "Call the police!" And I didn't, and it just struck me there. They'd have to find a phone to call the police. They can't just pull out their smartphone, right? Or do a hey Siri. They actually have to call the police. And think back to the days of payphones and all of that. And so I talk about the Christians inventing what I call a religious technological revolution or innovation, where instead of having to go to a priest or a temple to connect with God, you can do it anywhere at any time, and you can be anyone. And this would have been like switching from landlines to cell phones. I mean, we don't look back now. We're not like, like the worst thing is when your phone dies. Like, I have this like panic. Like, if my phone's down to like, if the red, like the 10% or whatever, like I'm panicking, like I'm going to die. And with my kids, anytime I drop them off at sports practices, I'm like, is your phone charged? Is your phone, like, I have this unhealthy fear that the phone's going to die and I can't track them. Right. I have them all low jacked. It's not a secret. But think about, like, when we grew up, and I'm 40 something, we just wandered around. We eventually found our way home. But like, we wouldn't look back. We love having our phones. In the same way, the Christians had this amazing ability to connect with God because of the Holy Spirit, because of Jesus Christ. You have a direct line to God. Like, it's great to have other people pray for you, and you should ask other people to pray for you. But you have as much power in prayer as a wealthy elite. Like that we take that for granted, but they wouldn't take that for granted 2,000 years ago, that I have as much access. I've recently been teaching on the Beatitudes. I know we got to wrap up soon, but I've been, blessed are the poor in spirit. What does that mean? I've wrestled with this for a long time. And I think Matthew, if I'm reading Matthew correctly, I think this is what he's saying. He's saying, the poor in spirit are those people, those Jews, who don't have the funds and the means to fully participate in temple religion. So the temple system had become corrupt to the point where they make it actually hard to get involved in the sacrifices in the temple worship. So imagine, like back in the day, so my tradition a long time ago is Free Methodist, and Free Methodist comes from the language of Free Pew Methodist, meaning back in the day in America, you had to pay for your pew. And these Methodists came along and said pews should be free. So imagine if you had to pay for a parking spot at church. Imagine if you had to pay to take communion, right? Think about, and if there were tiers, of you get real wine if you have this amount, or else you get grape juice. I don't know if you guys watch the show Upload. It's fascinating. It's about people uploading their consciousness to a virtual world when they die, so they can live on. So it's kind of like heaven. But they make it economical, meaning only some people can afford it, and even then, you have to pay into higher echelons of heaven or lower echelons. And I think this is kind of what Matthew's thinking in saying. So he's seeing all the people that can't afford sacrifices because of the way the temple institution has been run, and he's saying, blessed are you, meaning God's going to change it so that everybody has equal access to all the great things that God has to offer. What a dream. Like, it's human tendency to create tiers of privilege. It's human tendency. I know we got to end. I want to end with one thing. Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
If because I've had conversations with people before, and they've said, well, there's good weird and there's bad weird. So what's good weird? So let me tell you what I think good weird is. The term Christian started to develop late first century, and to pagan ears, they wouldn't know the name Christ because it comes from Judaism. And so they mistook it for the word Christos,
which is good.
So, Christos means Christ. Christos means good or useful or kind. And it was a common slave name because you often name slaves utilitarian things, like either a number, like your slave number 1, primus, or secundus, slave number 2, or like even really obvious things like ampliatus means large person, and urbanus means person from the city, right? And so you could name someone Christos, meaning utilitarian, like convenient person, but it also meant kind. And so critics in the 2nd century and 3rd century of Christianity would purposely confuse the name and call them Christianoi, which means useful ones, but it really means like a slave name. It was really saying you're no better than slaves.
Oh, okay.
You're throwaway people. You're utilitarian. You're throwaway. And we have early Christian writers after the New Testament who actually said, we're going to take it and we're going to actually transform that into we're the kind ones. We're the kind people. So if you're going to call us Christianoi, the useful or the kind, we're going to own that. But we're going to say we're going to be the kind people. What if Christians in America were known for being generous and kind? What if that was the number one? You pulled random people on the street, Seattle, Santa Ana, Portland. You said, first word comes to mind. Don't think about it. And they said kindness. Well, if that was the first thing, think how that would transform Christianity and the world.
Yeah. That's really good. And I think this is a helpful book for us to realize, like you said, that this has been kind of the quote unquote Christian cultural waters for a while. And so you forget just how strange it is when you try to baptize it Americanism or whatever nation somebody else might live in. And maybe as a last little thing, because we talked about it, I don't think we've really hit this home as much. If you can just kind of end this with talking about like how Christianity like equalizes people. It's both a hierarchy, it's both the male, it's the female, it's a slave, it's a free, it's a barbarian, it's a Scythian, it's all of this, which again, Rome being ridiculously hierarchical, that's just how society worked. Whether we like it or not, it's somewhat American, and it is certainly Eastern, and somewhat Western. But what does this mean for just your average day Joe and Jane? It's like, what does this Christian mean for me versus these other religions, or how Americans view this stuff? Like, what does Christianity do to level people's playing field and say, hey, you're all equal in Christ?
Yeah. Just a brief illustration. I came across this quotation from Pliny, who was a Roman statesman, not a Christian, and he was writing to a military leader named Tiro. And Pliny's giving friendly advice to Tiro
on basically how to capture him and
up and comer.
Stuff.
Up and comer in the military world. And Tiro is in a position where he has people above him, he has people below him, and Pliny noticed that Tiro is kind of playing friendly, becoming too friendly with his inferiors, and being too chummy. And Pliny thinks this is bad. He says, he's basically saying, you're going to lose the respect of where you fall in the rank and lose the respect of your superiors if you're too friendly to inferiors. And he has this famous quote, nothing can be more unequal than the appearance of equality. And what he means by that is equality is right for people who deserve it. Equality is good for people who deserve it, but not for people who don't deserve it. Then it creates chaos. And that was actually a very common notion before the modern era, that the world works according to hierarchy and equality is a bad thing. And then here you have the Christians, and you actually mentioned this, Peter, where the different, Paul has some radical things he says, but almost nothing is more radical in the Roman world than to say there is no Roman and barbarian. And barbarian, like, don't think of like barbarian.
No,
barbarian means non-Roman. Non-Romanized, right? And so he's and this was Rome's whole goal was to make the world Romanized. Like, this was their entire goal. And for Paul to just flat out say, neither Jew nor Gentile, slave or free, male or female, civilized or uncivilized, quote unquote, he's not saying there aren't gender differences, sex differences.
Totally.
He totally believes in those. He said he's proudly Jewish. I'm proudly Asian American. I'm proudly American, right? What he is saying is these shouldn't be ways that we show superiority over other people. My wife and I are watching a TV show right now called A Small Light, which is about the Anne Frank family and the people that hid them. It's on Disney Plus, National Geographic show. It's incredible. And I just can't fathom this idea that a people group could treat another people group as inferior to the point of genocide, right? Like, I have to keep reminding myself, this is real history. Like, this isn't like a made up man in the high castle kind of, like, this actually happened.
And only 80 years ago.
Yeah, it happened,
2 generations ago.
And so we're not that far. You talk about apartheid, right? You talk about what's happening right now in the Gaza, right? With the inhumanity that's happening right now. Like people will look back in 80 years, people could look back now and say the inhumanity, right? And Christianity has at its root, right? I quote over and over again in the book, God is not a respecter of persons, meaning he doesn't look at people in a class system.
Nope.
That's easy for us to say, but this is how the world's operated for thousands of years. And we even have our own classes, whether it's white collar, blue collar, or geographic classes, right? Or abled and disabled. We have our own class systems. We don't always just refer to it, but we do. And how can Christianity again become no respecter of persons? Meaning we don't run people through a grid of value based on their demographic. right? This is the Good Samaritan principle, right? We don't run people through the grid of worthiness. And I think one of the challenges to us as we wrap up is, but do we?
Mhm.
Do we? Like, look at your church. Look at the cars in the parking lot. Are they all Teslas and Audis,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Look at who's there, and talk to people, talk to new people, and say, why were you comfortable or uncomfortable in our church,
Yeah.
and why? Like, talk to people about that, because it's human sinful nature
Mhm.
to create structures of haves and have-nots. It's,
Yeah.
read 1 Corinthians. That's what 1 Corinthians is
This is
about.
something I think about all the stinking time, because I'm a pastor, so I'm looking out to see if somebody from quote unquote not my culture comes in, would they feel comfortable in this church? Again, barring, like, obviously the gospel can be hard for them to
Off-putting,
understand
yeah.
and all that. Yeah, off-putting. Like, not talking about that, but saying, would it make sense to them? Is it understandable to them? Are they comfortable here? But yeah, that's like, we don't realize, like, this is something we can inculturalize Christianity, even if we're not thinking about it. We still do some of this stuff. And that's why I think your book is a huge help, because you get to look at our culture and look at the Greco-Roman culture and say, yeah, they were actually pretty strange. They were actually pretty weird. And in a sense, like, are we that weird right now? Are we kind of sticking out like a sore thumb? Now, again, not because we're trying to stick out like a sore thumb, but like you said, because we can't help but sticking out like a sore thumb in the midst of our cultural context, which I think is a helpful reminder. People who can read this book can see some of these examples and say, these are forebears in the faith, and how are we doing the same thing? But yeah, Dr. Gupta, thank you so much, for your time, for your work, for writing this book, for coming on our show, talking about your book. Maybe just a plug where people can find you, stuff that you're working on, anything about Dr. Nijay Gupta that people are like, yeah, I want to read more and see more from this guy.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's when you write a book, you want people to read it, and you guys engage with it deeply. I really appreciate that. I teach at Northern Seminary, so I encourage anyone interested in seminary, check us out. You can study from anywhere in the world, and we do a lot of online classes and intensives. You mentioned my podcast at the beginning, Slow Theology, where my friend AJ Swoboda and I talk a lot about how to help people find their way back to Jesus from deconstruction, doubt, and disappointment, disenchantment. It's a lot of the stuff we're talking about in this book of, like, what do we do with what I call ugly Christianity? We need to talk about it. We need to help people know that Jesus is better. So Slow Theology, check that out. And I have a blog, as you mentioned, Crux Sola, and I'm on social media. Yeah, Strange Religion is my latest, so check it out. And appreciate the feedback.
Of course, yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure. And if you write more books, we're going to have Dr. Gupta on again in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd love to. Thanks, guys.